Day 753 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 431,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 810 in the past day. And there has been new data published from Russia's Pension and Social Insurance Fund showing a massive surge in disabled recipients of late, which gives additional credence to these numbers, and I'll mention about that a little bit more later in this video. Then as for hardware losses, 19 tanks, 17 APVs, 34 artillery, and 15 oil refineries, depending on how you count them. And on that topic, we'll head over to the map now because over the weekend, another 3 Russian oil refineries have been successfully hit by Ukrainian drones, some of which had quite a significant detonation fallout as well. So starting out, there was the Rosneft facilities in Syzran and the Novokubeshevsk oil refinery, both in the Samara region. So I'll need to zoom right in there. Quite the distance away as well, with video footage showing some extensive fires, and it's quite the achievement because technically the farthest away oil depot hit to date, just below the city of Samara, at about 900 kilometers from the closest frontline Ukrainian positions, which in fact beats out the St. Petersburg oil depot strikes from last month by about 50 kilometers in range. Then, if that wasn't enough over the weekend, another Russian oil refinery was successfully intercepted by a Ukrainian drone at the Krasnodar Krai region, so down the south there, which is roughly 160 kilometers or about 100 miles from the Kerch Bridge. Which is truly baffling, given that this area is often referred to as one of the most densely protected Russian airspaces that you can find. Well, that and the Kremlin, I'm sure. And there was even footage from bystanders as they watched multiple Ukrainian attack drones fly uncontested into the territory and indeed into the refinery. And hey, some of these refineries are actually high output refineries. So as it turns out, the earlier mentioned Syzran oil refinery is within the top 8 of Russian oil refinery total output volume producers. But when you remove from the list the already hit Tuapse and the Novoshatinsk refineries, and the Ryazan location, it's actually genuinely possible that Syzran now ranks in the top 5, or should I say did rank in the top 5, given what it now has to contend with. And so with Russia having around 35 to 40 refineries, this makes for a pretty serious situation, as Russia's energy security needs for domestic use, and not the least of which military needs, makes for a key resource they need to absolutely protect in this war. And although we always ask the question, what air defense doing, we also know that they don't grow on trees. So they cannot be everywhere at once and really needed within the ongoing context of war and invasion into Ukraine. So these types of Russian resources are stretched razor thin, obviously, as we see. And so it would seem that the use of inexpensive and readily available drones against Russia's minimally protected and highly flammable oil refineries delivers substantial economic and psychological impacts at a fraction of the cost of, say, conventional missiles. And in the end, this Ukrainian strategy could just pay off, with diverting Russian air defenses from Ukraine, weakening their occupational forces. But either way, Russian military assets like these, and they really truly are, would simply still be playing a game of musical chairs, as Russia looks to find whatever it can to potentially help protect these important sites. Then we move to the bordering Russian oblasts, including Kursk and Belgorod, as we have seen another day, and indeed weekend, of events courtesy of the anti-Kremlin Russian insurgent forces. As, for instance, fighters of the Siberian Battalion announced that they entered another settlement in the Belgorod region, this time at the Gorkovsky settlement, and claimed to have captured a building of the local administration. Then, a different group, the Freedom of Russia Legion, also claims to have taken this photo from newly liberated lands as well. But also, the same group, also known as the RDK, were seen to be taking down a Russian flag, which is certainly a very symbolic occurrence of an event, particularly when it's happening beyond Ukrainian borders, and perhaps something we would never have expected to have seen in our lifetimes. Then if we move a little bit further north, we also saw an ammo dump exploding in Tyotkino, there it is, as part of the Kursk Oblast. But then we also saw really continued photos and footage, this time of the Siberian Battalion in the earlier mentioned Gorkovsky settlement, which was at least partially liberated 2 days ago, it seems. And they even published a visual claim of Russian losses during their raids on Russian territory, which includes a number of tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and other various platforms. And they were even kind enough to show us some of that footage as well. But perhaps most disturbing and unexpected is how we saw over the weekend a single Russian tank waltz on into one of these regions and going ahead to be shooting and then hitting and therefore demolishing civilian houses in the process. And that one happened just inside the Belgorod Oblast, up the top, or should I say the west of the Belgorod Oblast. And as a result of all these activities, we then saw Chief Intelligence Officer of Ukraine, Bordanov, speak about these anti-Kremlin Russian volunteer forces and their activities, stating, quote, "As far as we know, they will not stop anytime soon. They will do as much as they are able to, and as we can see, they are strong enough to achieve at least some success. I would happily trade Tetkino for Melitopol, but we'll see how it goes," as he refers to a Russian-occupied city in the southern central Zaporizhia region. Then headed into Ukraine proper now, so we'll start out in the Donbass, as we sometimes do, and into the Avdiivka axis, as Russian forces continued some land capture consolidations in the Orlivka and Berdichi directions. But they are getting a little bit landlocked as they continue with these activities, pushing up to the very limits of the lakes and rivers, from where further offensives would be considerably more difficult. Whereas right now they might actually be better suited to make a more concerted effort just north and south of these settlements. After all, there's just more room to move. Then somewhere in the east, starting off, so we saw quite a few things, but I'll just give the main ones today, the highlights. So a Russian BMP-3 suffered a catastrophic cook-off after taking Ukrainian DPICM, so these are the cluster munitions, fire, and an FPV drone as well. And it always seems to be the BMP-3s, the infantry fighting vehicles of the Russian forces, that tend to almost always include this massive detonation like you can see there. Then also, somewhere in the east, Ukrainian soldiers from the 60th Separate Mechanized Brigade destroyed, or at least damaged, a Russian tank. Then we also saw Ukrainian military from the 92nd Separate Assault Brigade successfully targeting Russian armoured vehicles, such as infantry fighting vehicles, once again near Bakhmut. But then also we saw them targeting some new locations near Marinka, taking out some vehicles, and there you go, Z marks the spot. Plus, also for the east, and really generally anywhere on the map on the front lines, and certainly something I don't show enough of, plenty of Russian Buhanka vans and logistical trucks near to those front lines, as they are always being taken out in some of the greatest numbers known to man. So then we head across on the map to the Zaporizhia front, where the AFU appear to be doing it pretty tough, with a lot of exertion applied from the Russian standpoint, which is on the now long-standing Orikhiv axis. And so we are aware of the AFU receiving additional ammunitions, artillery shells for instance, which are sorely needed, But this was only announced so far as the more easterly activities were concerned. But there is no actual specific word on Ukrainian sustainment capabilities as it pertains to the south as yet. Which leads me to a follow-up news segment soon. But before I do, let's move right next door, because in the heart of the Moldovan breakaway region of Transnistria, a dramatic event unfolded yesterday with a kamikaze drone, which was deployed in an aerial assault which targeted a military unit, striking down a Mi-8 helicopter, then subsequently reported on pretty quickly by the Russian TASS media news agency outlet. But what they don't tell you is that it was a decommissioned helicopter with a already visibly broken windshield and just stationary for many years, based on some satellite imagery we found. So, is it just me, or does the atmosphere here reek of a false flag attack? So I bet Russia now has to save this pro-Russian and internationally unrecognized breakaway region. Absolutely not suspicious at all. Plus, it was so unprovoked, it makes no sense. But also, take a look at this beautifully choreographed, cinematic-like footage that they just had to send to the Russian TASS media outlet to ensure they got every angle of this potential false flag destruction event. And so what I would expect here is that Transnistria is feeling the pinch or the pain of the increasingly isolated nature of their very little sliver of land from the rest of the world. Of course, tucked between Ukraine and Moldova. And as such, they would arguably go to such lengths and then run to Russia's TASS media outlet straight away, much like a child might do to their parent. But I mean, if you want to do a false flag attack, then do it right and destroy some of your actual useful military gear instead. But hey, I doubt they would even do that, because it would just make them that little bit more vulnerable. Then headed across to some news for today, and some very big news, because in a recent turn of events, or not so turn of events, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin once again emerged victorious in the Russian presidential elections, clinching an overwhelming 87% of the vote, as he went on to secure his fifth term as president, keeping him in office for another 6 years, at least. Which in fact means by the time he finishes his next term, he will be the longest leader in all of Russian and Soviet Russian history. But I did enjoy how, in an audacious and truly champion move, European Council President Charles Michel, who called Putin on Friday the 15th of March, which was day one of the 3 days of voting for the country, Charles Michel went on to congratulate Putin on his election victory before the voting barely even began. Yes, the voting was neither free or fair, with the result known in advance. And as it turns out, it was Putin's biggest landslide victory he had ever had in Russia, again the 87%, which far surpassed any other election year of his. Stats on the screen. But the voting process was not without its issues, as Russian media reported explosions at various polling stations throughout Russia and occupied Crimea. We also saw some Russians and Ukrainians voicing their dissent through setting voting stations alight or destroying voting boxes with ink, while certain others were forced to cast their vote in Ukraine's Russian-held regions amid the backdrop of armed guards that, in some cases, appeared to be quite literally looking over the voters' back. Ah, democracy at work right there. They could at least try and pretend that it's more legitimate than that. Then moving across to a bit of a Czechia news update, as following the Czech Republic's recent moves to secure 800,000 artillery shells from global suppliers for Ukraine, well, in a move more recent, the country has now identified an additional 700,000 shells available for purchase, pending funding allocation. And so that means with a total influx of 1.5 million shells secured, at a total cost of around 3.3 billion US dollars, this will go a long way to support Ukraine's military, defensive and offensive operations within their country as they await the ramped up production as pledged by countries from around the globe. Then in some more news, the Belgian government approved an additional 412 million euros in aid for Ukraine, as declared by Defense Minister De Donner. So this significant package from the smaller nation includes mine hunters, armored ambulance, and plenty of artillery ammunition as well. And again, at nearly €500 million worth, or indeed almost $500 million worth, it's a pretty impressive feat from Belgium. Then moving across to a Russian military mobilization blunder segment, which is something I alluded to earlier in this video, as Russian pension and social insurance fund data has now shown a record growth between 2022 and 2023 in the amount of Russian men aged 31 to 59 years with a disability, and showing a year-on-year unprecedented increase of 30%, which now includes an additional whopping 507,000 recipients. So that's quite an interesting number. 500,000 new disabled individuals out of the blue. And remember, this data only includes men from the ages of 31 to 59. So not even including data from beyond the age of 60 or below the age of 30. Which hands down means the overall figure is bound to be much larger. And so over time, we tend to see a whole bunch of data leaks from various arms of the Russian government that always seems to give additional credence, as I say, to Russia's personnel losses in this war. Which, by the way, I still maintain is much higher than the figures I put on display at the start of every video. Then headed across to a quick funny to round it all off for today, guys. So we saw some recent footage of Russian marauders or robbers super excited to be in Avdiivka, not because of some national patriotism or pride, but instead because, quote, these houses have everything. So in this footage, this Russian man speaks to his wife through the video, saying things like, "Nobody believed me that I made it to Avdiivka. Look at these homes. They all have TV and beer in them. I need a truck so I can fill it up and take it back with me." Not even kidding, that's what he said. It's almost like the great washing machine fiasco of 2022. And I know you guys remember that one. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe if not already. And yeah, I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.